Here we discuss the managing tasks now. We have already seen what exactly a task is all about, and now we discuss what can you do, what all different ways you can handle a task. As we already discussed, last and first out is what the stack is, how the stack is maintained, and instead of being placed within the current task, perhaps you want an activity in your app to begin a new task when it is started. So what they are trying to discuss here is that there could be a scenario wherein you might not want your new activity to start or to be included in the same task where which was used earlier, which was being used earlier. You might want it to start as a new task. In that case, you have certain options available to you as a developer which you can use, and that's what we will be managing right now. That's what we will be discussing now, right? So you can do these things and more with attributes and activity manifest. So manifest we already know, right? So in the activities manifest, you can make some changes, or you can also have some flags available which you can use with the start activity method so as to make all these things happen. Now they have listed down these couple of these in this regard. The principal activity attributes you can use are task affinity, launch mode, allow task pre-parenting. So these are a couple of activities which you can go through, attributes which you can go through and decide which ones you want to use. And most of the times you can understand that what exactly does this attribute mean. So launch mode would mean in what mode you want to launch this activity. Is it going to be a parent activity or is it going to be a child activity? Finish on task launch. Once the task is launched, then do you want to finish this activity or not? Similarly, there are some flags also listed here: flag activity, new task, clear top, and single top. In the following sections we will be discussing these. One thing which they have mentioned here is, if you want, you can also make changes in the way your app looks in the recent screen. Recent screen is it comes up when you press that recent button in the Android phone, and you can see what all recent apps you have been working on or you've been using, right? So you can make changes in the appearance of your app in the recent screens also, but it's not really recommended until unless you have done your due diligence. Defining launch modes. So how do you define a launch mode? You can define a launch mode in two ways. One is using the manifest file, and another one is using the intent flag. When you declare an activity in your manifest file, you can specify how the activity should associate with the tasks when it starts. And using intent flags, when you call start activity a method, you can include a flag in the intent that declares how or whether the new activity should associate with the current task, right? Now, as such, if activity A starts activity B can define in its manifest how it should associate with the current task, if at all. And activity A can also request how activity B should associate with current task, right? So there are two options available to you. If you want, you can make changes or you can tell the Android system through activity A itself or through activity B. But in case if both activities define how activity B should associate with the task, then activity A's request as defined in the intent is honored over activities B's request as defined in its manifest. So in case such a scenario standoff occurs wherein activity A wants activity B to be started in a particular way, which is by defining it in the intent, then this request will be honored and not the other activity's request. Some launch modes available for the manifest file are not available as flags for an intent, and likewise some launch modes available as flags for an intent cannot be defined in the manifest. So this is also something which you need to remember. Not all the options are available. Both the options are available in both the cases. So using the manifest file, how do you do it using the manifest file? When declaring an activity in your manifest file, you can specify how the activity should associate with the task using the activity elements launch mode attribute. So the launch mode could be a standard, that is a default mode. It could be single top. If an instance of the activity already exists at the top of the current task, the system routes the intent to that instance through a call to its new intent method rather than creating a new instance. So if there is already an instance at the top of the stack, then the system will route this intent to that instance rather than creating a new instance. The activity can be instantiated multiple times Each instance can belong to different tasks, and one task can have multiple instances, but only if activity at the top of the backstack is not an existing instance of the activity. So there's only one thing which has to be made sure, and that is the top of the stack, or the, you can say, the backstack or the task stack, that has to have only one instance of the activity which is being created. For example, suppose a task's backstack consists of root activity A with activities B, C, D on top. The stack A, B, C, D, D is on the top, right? So this is the top of the stack and this is the bottom, right? An intent arrives for an activity of type D. So you are firing an intent which is of activity type D. If D has the default standard launch mode, a new instance of the class is launched and the stack becomes A, B, C, D, D. Two instances of the same activity are getting created. However, if D's launch mode is single top, the existing instance of D receives the intent through on new intent, right? Because it's at the top of the stack remains ABCD. However, if an intent arrives from an activity of type B, then a new instance of B is added to the stack even if its launch mode is single top, right? Now, as they have mentioned it here, the single top comes into play or comes into into action only when the top of the stack has the same activity instance that is getting fired right now. If it is not the case, then that does not happen, right? So like they said, the current status of the stack is ABCD, and if a new intent comes for the activity B, then the new stack would be ABCDB. B will also get added even if it's single top, because here it is D. The top of the stack is still B and still D and not B, right? When a new instance of an activity is created, the user can press the back button to return to the previous activity. But when an existing instance of an activity handles a new intent, the user cannot press the back button to return to the state of the activity before the new intent arrived in on new intent. Single task, another mode in which you can launch it. The system creates a new task and instantiates the activity at the root of the new task. However, if an instance of the activity already exists in a separate task, the system routes the intent to the existing instance through a call to its on new intent method. So the system has its own calls which it makes as and when required. Like in this case, it is making a call which is called on new intent. So if if the activity has a launch mode of single task, in that case, if an instance of the activity already exists in a separate task, then the system routes the intent to the existing instance, right? So there's only one task which will get there will be a new task getting created in case in case there is no instance of the activity already existing in another task, right? But if there is an instance of the same activity existing in separate task, the system routes the intent to the existing instance through a call to its on new method rather than creating a new instance. Only one instance of the activity can exist at a time, right? Although the activity starts in a new task, the back button will still returns the user to the previous activity. Now here this is quite interesting, wherein they say that if you press the back button, the activity has already started in the new task, and if you press the back button, the user is still returned to the previous activity from where the intent was fired, right? And that's something very good, as in because it's a new task that has been created, and you cannot you will not be able to get any other, you actually cannot go back to that stack which has only one entry, right? Single instance, same as single task, except that system doesn't launch any other activities into the task holding the instance. The activity is always the single and only member of its task. Any activity started by this is open in a separate task. So there will be only one activity in the backstack, and any new activity that are getting started will be opening up in a separate task. As another example, the Android browser app declares the web browser activity should always open in its own task by specifying the single task launch mode in the activity element. So this is something which Android browser app has declared in its web browser activity, that is its single task launch mode. This means that if your app issues an intent to open the Android browser, its activity is not placed in the same task as your app. Instead, either a new task starts for the browser, or if the browser already has a task running in the background, then that task is brought forward to handle that new intent. right? A very good example of how this all works out. Regardless of whether an activity starts in a new task or in the same task as the activity started it, the back button always takes the user to the previous activity. However, if you start an activity that specifies a single task launch mode, then if an instance of that activity exists in a background task, that whole task is brought to the foreground. At this point, the back stack now includes all the activities from the task brought forward at the top of the stack. So they have shown it in a diagram here. What happens is that there is a foreground activity, that this is the backstack that is being maintained by the system, and there's another task, background task, which consists of two instances, activity y and activity x instance. Now let's say activity y has been declared with a single task launch mode, and when you start the activity y, the entire background task will get into the backstack, including the activity x instance. And when you navigate back, then you will be taken back to the activity x instance, and again when you navigate back, obviously you will be then taken to the activity 2. Right now this is happening because the activity y has been declared with the single task instance. Right now let's talk about using intent flags in our next video. See you.